Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn entitled Redistricting in Tennessee, featuring Representative Bob Freeman and hosted by Vice Mayor Jim Schulman. I'm Tabitha Robinson, co-VP of membership of WPCTN. Thank you all for tuning in. And before we get started, I just want to remind everyone to keep their cameras and mics off. And if you are a guest at today's program, welcome. We love having you. WPCTN hosts programming just like this one all year round. And if you're interested in learning more about us or joining, please visit WPCTN.com. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker to you, State Representative Bob Freeman. He earned his bachelor's from MTSU and master's from Lipscomb University. Freeman's career experience includes working as vice president at Freeman Webb. He has served on the board of the Tennessee Environmental Council, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Metro Sustainability Advisory Committee, the U.S. Green Building Council, and Tennessee Market Leadership Advisory Board. He was also appointed to the Nashville Homelessness Commission. He is currently assigned to the Finance, Ways and Means Committee, Health Committee, and Insurance Committee in the state legislature, among other committees. Representative Freeman, thank you for being here today. And Jim, thank you for moderating. So I am going to go ahead and pass it on to you. Jim, take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tabitha. Thank you for letting me moderate this. I'm looking forward to it. I've talked to Representative Freeman a little bit about redistricting in the past. It's a very interesting subject and very relevant right now. Again, I think Tabitha hit all the high points of Representative Freeman's career. He represents the 56th district, which is my district. So Bob is my state representative. The only other thing I'll add is that he serves on the very important ethics committee, which is a much smaller committee that kind of oversees and watches basically the legislature as a whole regarding overall ethics. So Representative Freeman, we're really pleased that you're doing this. Again, thank you for WPCTN for hosting this really important and interesting subject. With that, I'm going to be watching the questions. We'll reserve some time at the end for questions. Go ahead and put them in the chat box.
Hey, how you doing?
And everybody mute their microphones. And I'm going to turn it over to Representative Freeman. Thanks for being on.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I have a brief 3-hour presentation. I'm totally kidding. It'll be very quick and fun. And Vice Mayor, thank you for doing this. And I always enjoy your community conversations. And we've actually talked a little bit about this in the past. So thank you for really shining a light on it. This is something that happens once every 10 years. And so people forget and they don't really know how seriously to take it until it's too late in many instances. So thank you for all your work, and Tabitha, thanks for putting this on. I'm going to share a screen here and begin a brief presentation. I think this is it. Does that look right?
It looks right. We can see it.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little about redistricting. As I said before, this is something that happens every 10 years and is actually in the Constitution that every 10 years we need to do a new census. So this is the current makeup of the Tennessee House. There's a map of the Senate that I didn't include here and of the U.S. Congress as well. The Tennessee legislature is responsible for redrawing the lines of the House, the Senate, U.S. House, or Tennessee House, Tennessee Senate, and U.S. Congress. What is deep redistricting? I'll let you read that, but every 10 years there's a census, and there's a short and a long, or a big and a small. They call it two different names, but this is truly going door to door and finding out where people live, who's living in the house, accounting for For those people, we ask ethnic background, gender, age. If anybody's gone to any of the old ancestry.com or any of the history of your family, this is where we get that information. And so Article 2, Section 4 of the Tennessee Constitution tells us that we redraw boundaries substantially according to the population, and we do so after each census made by the Bureau of Census that's made available to the General Assembly. I will note that it's interesting in our state constitution, there is no requirement for us to have open meetings, take public comment. It is solely left up to the discretion of the General Assembly. That's an interesting point to make. So just to give a little bit of background on the 2020 census, the census kicked off in 2020 in Alaska. It moves its way east. March, we had the onset of COVID, which ended up delaying both the returns and made some difficulties with folks collecting census data. Just anybody who's on the call today, when you get your first letter to do the census and to report your numbers, go online and do it immediately, because census workers, who are largely volunteers and some paid volunteers, they have to follow up. So they're going to call you. If they can't get you on the phone and get you an answer, they're going to come knock on your door. COVID made this extremely difficult because there was some reluctance to answer questions, answer doors. I believe that we got an accurate census response, but it just made it that much more difficult. So if you kind of go through the timeline here, January 14th, we put up a House redistricting number. The 26th, which was later than normal, we got the apportionment data, which is, I'll talk about in a second. The 12th, which was significantly later than we normally receive this data, of August, we got the state level redistricting data. And on the 25th, the speaker appointed, for the first time, I believe ever, a bipartisan committee to review the redistricting information and to draw these new maps. Just a little bit of information on the 2020 census data. The U.S. grew about 7.5%. Tennessee grew at a faster rate at almost 9%. That was a little bit more than what I think the projections were. And had we waited until after COVID, I think those numbers would have been even larger, because we saw a large increase in people moving to Tennessee. We're still the #1 destination for people moving out of New York and California, both from U-Haul rentals and different real estate firms. One thing that we saw, and this was a nationwide trend, was that there was very uneven growth in where people are moving. We saw a surge of people moving to cities over the last decade. I know a lot of people heard during the original COVID conversations that we were actually seeing people leaving the cities because they didn't want to be in such close proximity. That's actually now coming back around, and people want to be back in cities where they can have closer access to resources, access where they can live, work, and play. And the new one that people are putting in there is live, work, play, invest. That's what our city centers have become, where people can build their business and invest. But as you can see, we had 17 counties that grew. Almost all of them are in Middle Tennessee, and all of them are because of the growth and the economic engine that is Davidson County. The next slide talks about negative growth and where we saw people leaving from. We can probably debate the reason for this all day, but my belief is that if you look at the areas where people are leaving, those are areas that over the last decade have lost production jobs. They've lost their hospitals. Their largest export in most cases is talent and people, and that was reflected in this last census data. So of the 3 grand divisions, both West and East saw massive declines. There's another chart that you can find pretty easily that shows the decline in individual district level data. And in many of the East and Western counties, they were actually smaller in 2020 than they were in 2010. So not just did they not keep up with the growth of the state as a whole, they actually decreased in volume, in population over a 10-year period. Kind of growth highlights. Some of these are a little misleading. I know that a lot of people were shocked at the growth of 35% growth in Williamson County and Rutherford County and Wilson County. And while those numbers are great and they are very impressive, the less than 100,000 people growth that Williamson County made was less in total number of people moving to Davidson County. Nashville was so large to begin with that the increase of 100,000 people over the 10-year period was a smaller percentage of the total before, which made the percent change less. And so while percent change is a relevant and important number, the total population growth to me is probably more relevant as it relates to real growth, real job growth, real desire for people to be in the communities. Anyway, but these are interesting. If you look, the first 6, 5 are all in the middle, and then you've got the balance of the decline is all in West. And so these are the highest 5, highest or lowest 5, and as a percentage of change. So let's talk a little bit about what this means and how we use this data. So the Tennessee Constitution defines that we have 99 state house seats that are evenly divided based on the population of Tennessee. So if you look at 1990, there were 4.8 million people in Tennessee. That divided by came up with roughly 49,000 people per state house seat. 2000, we can keep doing the math, 2000, 2010. 2020, we were 6.9 thousand people, which means each state house seat needs to be about 69,000 people. And that's because we've got to make sure that we're following the one person, one vote. So for years in rural parts of Tennessee, they would keep the boundaries of a state house seat the same. And as people were leaving and moving to the cities, we had a huge shift in the proportion of people in a rural seat versus a state house seat. So my seat should be exactly the same as the seat that represents Haywood County. Even though Nashville is significantly larger, I should represent the same amount of people. So each person that votes for me has the exact same amount of say in our process as anyone else in the rest of the state. And so that's why we have to shift the boundary lines to make sure that we abide by the one person, one vote. We get a letter from the Speaker of the House that clearly defines what the numbers are and what they should be. And so this is the actual legal letter. It comes from Doug Himes, who's the ethics counsel, but he's also the person in charge of handling this. So back to the ideal population sizes for 2020. The ideal congressional seat should be about 767,000 people. Oddly enough, that's roughly the size of Davidson County. So it could very easily be that Davidson County could be its own congressional seat in and of itself. The Tennessee Senate ideal size is 209,000. This 10% overall range that's attached to both the Tennessee House and Tennessee Senate is what's called the 10% rule. And it's the 10%. And that is that each seat should try to be within 10 percentage points of the ideal population range. That doesn't mean that if every seat is outside of the 10% or dead on or under, that it's going to be deemed to be legal or lawfully allowable. But that's kind of the range that we try to fit within. So that means that a state house seat, even though the ideal range is 69,000, can be as low as 66,000 or as high as 73,000. We also, we can't split more than 30 counties across the state. So if you have a bunch of smaller counties that don't have enough to make up the 69 or even the 66 on the low end, we can take a portion of counties to make up that difference. So and if you look at Davidson County, we are wholly encompassed by 9 state house seats, but one state senator, Farrell Hale, comes in and picks up a little sliver in the Northeast. The intent is to try and keep communities of interest whole, geographic locations whole, and to keep the house seats contiguous. This is a malapportionment table talking about how over or under we are on the different seats. So House seat 63, which is Glen Cassida, grew 99,000 or grew to 99,000 people in this most recent census. That's a 42% over the ideal number. You can kind of go through the rest of these numbers. So you can look at Williamson, Rutherford, Montgomery. That's Jason Hodges, Wilson, Sumner, Shelby. You can see beginning with the House District 90 is Shelby County is 15% under. They had a drop in the total number of population as it went. District 82 had a drop. So this begins the next part of this. So you can see where people are moving. These arrows show population growth and where they're going. With the heat map here being Davidson County. The interesting part of going through this process is that it's effectively a 99-piece moving jigsaw puzzle. So if you can think of doing a jigsaw puzzle that's 99 pieces, but every time you put a piece in, the other pieces move. It becomes extremely difficult to try and build a map that follows all of the legal guidelines that we'll talk about here in just one second. So the guidelines that we were directed to follow are as follows. Each district must be represented by a single member. They shall comply by the constitutional requirements, federal constitutional requirements of one person, one vote. Geographic features, boundaries, population figures are all based on the 2020 census numbers. So you can't use a guess. You can't use where do you think we're going to be when it happens. They have to be based on those numbers. Even if you know that as you're designing a district that it's going to grow at a rate that's going to outpace where it is today, you have to use the 2020 numbers. They must be contiguous. Contiguity by water is sufficient, or contiguity, I don't know how you say that word. is sufficient. So that means that if you're on the other side of the Mississippi, you can jump over and pick up. Everybody understands what it is. No more than 30 counties can be split to attach to other counties or parts to form multi-county districts. If we go back to that original map, you can see that many counties outside of the large cities are made up of multiple counties. It's not uncommon for a state house seat to encompass 2-3 counties as it goes. And then the redistricting plan must comply with the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution of Tennessee and the United States. The Constitution simply says that they have to be reasonably compact and contiguous. That's it. The Voting Rights Act is a federal act that protects minority groups to make sure that we are giving every single person in Tennessee a voice. This is where it gets interesting. So submission of redistricting plans. So any person in the state of Tennessee that wishes to submit a plan of their own has that right. If you would like to do it, send it to me. I will put my email address in the chat box at the end of this. I will help you try to comply with the rules that the House has set forward, but they have to be submitted by noon on Friday, November 12th. And they have to comply with the following items. They must use the same population and geographical divisions used by the State House, which is that census data. They must be submitted for the state as a whole, meaning that if you have an idea for Davidson or your community, it's not going to be accepted unless you show a map that has all 99 single House member districts for the plan. So 99 for the House, 33 for the Senate, and comply with the breakdown on the congressional side. They must be presented in electronic format using Maptitude, Redistrictor, or another electronic format. There are tons of free services. Dave's Redistricting is probably the most common free version. It has all of the preloaded census data already in it, and it's pretty intuitive and user-friendly. And then they should all be accompanied with a plan report creating the total population of each district, the deviation from that standard or the ideal size, and the total overall range of the plan as a whole. So meaning, what is each individual district over and how does that work? And then once all those plans get submitted, they will go in front of the redistricting committee. We will debate and review it based on its constitutional legality and whether or not it follows the rest of the guidelines that we've set forth. And then that map gets turned into a narrative form and will be placed into 3 bills and their companion Senate bills. So House Bill 1035, 1037, and 1034 will be the respective state House, state Senate, U.S. congressional maps. And if anybody's ever looked at it, it's extremely complicated to follow along because it will break up on census blocks, which is what the census comes from. So it will identify in a community 35 census blocks, and then it can identify voting precincts, and then it can further subdivide it by census block, but it can preclude, north of X road to, Y road. And so the maps are probably going to be the easiest way for most people to understand, but this will be put in a narrative form. There will be an attachment to the bill, but this bill is what we will vote on. This is kind of the timeline of where we are. So we will go back into session second Tuesday in January, which is January 11th of this next year. The qualifying deadline for people that decide that they would like to run for office is Thursday, April 7th. You have to submit 90 days out for qualifying, which is the January 7th, 60 days is February 6th, 30 days is the 8th. So we will likely come back and immediately take up this redistricting to try and get, we probably won't, well, we will not hit the 90 days, but we will definitely try to beat this 60 days from qualifying to make sure that people have an opportunity to see their new districts and decide if that's a district that they would like to represent, and give people an opportunity to run. So, and then you kind of push out a little bit. The primary election date would be August 4th, and then general election is next year. State House, again, runs every 2 years, just like Congress. State Senate runs every 4 years. So this is kind of the process as we have it in Tennessee. Tennessee was very fortunate in that that we grew as a state, meaning that this is somewhere where people want to live. Middle Tennessee was very fortunate in that we grew as a region. And so because of that, we will see a shift of most seats in the Middle Tennessee and quite frankly across all of the state of Tennessee. And while we need to make sure that those seats remain representative of the people that they currently make up those districts, there will be a partisan debate over what those seats look like, and that's called gerrymandering. And so gerrymandering is the purpose of drawing a legislative boundary to obtain a partisan advantage. And there are two real ways that you can do it, and that I'm going to be looking out for to make sure that we don't do it. And I want to make sure and be clear, this is not illegal. As long as it follows the constitutionally set guidelines, one person, one vote, Voter Rights Act, reasonably compact and contiguous. There is no legal requirement for any seat to be Democrat, Republican, bipartisan, winnable, toss up, whatever the terms that you want to make. But the two things that the layperson needs to look out for is packing and cracking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So this is a competitive race. So if you look at it here, you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 blue dots and 8 red dots. So that means that every seat has an opportunity to be represented by either side. And to my opinion is that the way we get the best governance, there are two things to this. There's running for office, and then there's governing. Running for office should be and is extremely partisan, because people are identifying as a party, you're running against the other party. Once you get into governance, it should be somewhat bipartisan. We should be trying to make decisions about things that are best for the whole of the United States, or the whole of the state of Tennessee. When you have competitive races, you have to answer to Republicans' constituents the same as you do Democratic constituents. One of the things that happens in a gerrymandering situation is you pack all of a political ideology into one district. And that's done for two reasons. One, it allows for one party to have potentially fewer seats because you pack all those votes into one. But it also allows for a less productive governance, because you have people on the extremes of both ends as your constituency, and no real desire or obligation or need to work across the lines to make sure that you're doing what's best. The other one is cracking. And cracking is where you will pack one district and then you'll crack the rest of them open. And so you'll pack this district here with a bunch of blue, and then you'll spread the rest of them out over these other districts. And you end up with some different ways of looking at these races. So if you've got 50 people, 60% blue, 40% red, you can do a perfect representation, which is 3 blue, 2 red, which would be a representation of the voters. If you go over here, you've got compact but unfair. You've got 5 blue districts because you split everybody up. You've essentially cracked everybody. And then on the number 3, this would be a packing situation where you have 2 blue, 3 red, and you split them up. And as we're going through and identifying all of these new maps, I want to make sure that everybody is looking at it through this lens, because the idea that Davidson County could theoretically be split up, or the fear rather that the congressional seat in Davidson County could be split up, would be a perfect example of cracking, in that the predominant blue voters in Davidson County would be split up into 3 to 4 congressional seats and be diluted, if you will, by the other districts that surround. There are a couple of reasons why that is, in my opinion, extremely bad. The main one is Davidson County is the economic engine of our state. And if you remove the political incentive to ensure that you're looking out for the well-being of Davidson County, as opposed to answering to the partisan needs of a more partisan race, it makes it a little bit more difficult for Nashville to really have representation in Congress, which is extremely important. I think I saw a couple of people that used to work for Congressman Cooper on the panel here, and they, I'm sure, can attest to the fact that it's a daily battle to make sure that the wants and needs of Davidson County are met. And the idea, I see Lisa there shaking her head in complete agreement. And the idea that most of what we're debating here is red and blue partisan is not entirely true. Most of what we're debating is urban rural. And it just so happens that most of the urban is represented by blue and most of the rural is represented by red. And we have this weird, somewhat disconnect on ideology, but also a disconnect on financial incentive and what's really best for our city. And so as we're going through this process, we need to just make sure that we're following it. So I'm kind of embarrassed that does my presentation. I thought it would be a little longer, but this leaves plenty of time for some question and answer. So Jim, do we want to answer some questions in the chat room?
Yeah, so if you have questions, put them in the chat box and I will take a look at them. But let me get you started with a couple. Why Toksuk, Alaska? That was on the first slide. Why is that where the census starts, or do you know?
Well, it's the furthest western time zone, and so that's where it begins. So it kicks off there, and then it works its way across to the rest of the United States. And that whole census process to me is extremely interesting, because they are not able to take that data and report back for crimes, for folks that are hiding, that owe back child support. It is purely to track population at the time. And so I received multiple phone calls from people around the state that were unwilling to participate in the census because they thought that Big Brother was watching out, and that's just not the case. And so it's a giant both logistic and financial undertaking for the U.S. government to make sure that the census is as accurate as possible so that we can in fact have one person, one vote across the whole of the United States. And it's one of the most important things that people can make sure they do. Everything from, like I've said, representation in Congress, in the House and the Senate, but all the way down to federal dollars for schools, for Department of Transportation, how the government is going to future-proof to make sure that a community is ready to support the growing population with libraries and parks. And all of that is in some way, shape, or form tied to the population, which the number that we get for the population comes from the census.
Okay. So we're starting to get some questions in, mainly concerned about this concept of cracking. And the questions are, how do you prevent Davidson County from being cracked? How do you make sure that there is fair representation so that process doesn't happen?
So, I mean, that's a great question. There is, I mean, if we're asking what can we do today and what can people do today, everybody needs to pay attention. Everybody needs to know that this is happening. I would be willing to bet that the majority of people on the call right now, until I said it, did not know that we had till 2 weeks from now or less than 2 weeks from now to submit maps from the community to be considered as a potential district. And all of that is, it needs to be taken into consideration. This needs to be as open a process as possible. We need to make sure that every map gets a long period of public comment, that communities of interest have an opportunity to come and present their map and views to the legislature and to the body as they're contemplating what these new maps look like. But at the end of the day, elections have consequences, and it is solely up to the majority party to draw these maps. And if they decide that they don't want us at the table, or they don't want to listen to our views, and our being as a Democrat, the Democrats' views, they don't have to, and legally they don't need to. They're not required to. But I think that business owners, large groups of interest need to make sure that they're writing letters and letting them know that they do have an interest in keeping Davidson County whole. They do have an interest in making sure that they're fairly represented.
So there's questions coming in about getting involved in the process. Go back through, if you don't mind, those bills. There are 3 of them that are coming.
Yes.
Where are they going to go in the process? If you know, which committees are they going to go through? And then if people want to be involved, how do they get involved, either in the committee level or some other level?
Yeah. So so those bills will go through, I believe, state and local subcommittees. I can get an update on that when they get assigned, and we can send those out. But they will go through those subcommittees. It will follow the same process of any other bill as it becomes a law. The only difference is that we've had 2, and I believe we'll have a third one in December, public comment period. So we will have the submittal deadline on the 11th, and then we will it will be assigned to a committee, and then it will be heard on the House floor once, or it be assigned to a committee from the House floor, or presented on the House floor. Second reading will be assigned. It'll go through a subcommittee where people in the community can come out and listen and have their voice heard. It'll be in a full committee where people can come out and have their voice heard. There'll likely be a week delay in between that. and then it will go onto the House floor and go through a vote. And people have an opportunity to have their voice heard at that point.
All right, so there's all kinds of questions coming in. You have generated a firestorm of different questions. First of all, people do want your slides. So
Okay.
they
Happy
want
to
to take
share
a
those.
look at that. There's questions about, most of them kind of surround the fairness test. And how do you, with a supermajority Republican, how do you ensure fairness? There's an interesting question from Ronnie Green about how many districts currently meet the ideal of the identification of being competitive. And then how do you really seriously push the idea of fairness in this process if you have a supermajority party that's controlling it all?
Well, so therein lies the question of what is fair, and that gets debated fairly regularly. Is fair a district that represents the views of that district? Is fair one that is a constant toss-up? Is fair one that is the same as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago? And so fairness is, quite frankly, in the eye of the beholder, and the beholder is the majority party. What I am and have been advocating for is that we have a makeup of the ability to have a fair election, and fair meaning the ability to win. That they don't crack and pack in Davidson County districts that are largely unrelated, but they get cracked and packed based on political ideology. Currently, I represent, and I say currently because I really have no idea what my new seat will look like. Currently, I represent Belmead, Oak Hill, Forest Hills, Green Hills, and Creve Hall. And there can be a case made that there are communities of interest within that, but maybe not all the communities are represented, or not all the communities have the same wants and needs of each other. You look at a seat like what Representative Bo Mitchell has, and he represents Bellevue, and then his seat goes all the way up and over around the northern edge of the city to pick up population. And it's very difficult for me to say that the wants and needs of Bellevue are the same as the wants and needs of say Goodlettsville. And you kind of can keep making that argument. But what I want to do is make sure that Davidson County has appropriate representation, and that we don't get cracked and packed into, and that's both on the Senate, congressional, and House side.
Okay, so if you look at particularly the growth, if you looked at one of your first slides in terms of this tremendous growth that's going on in suburban areas around Davidson County. So one of the statements has the law of unintended consequences. So as Davidson County grows very, very quickly, and let's just assume for purposes of this question that it keeps growing, what happens to those districts that may be, maybe it is the unintended consequences? I mean, some of those districts may, as people kind of start looking for more affordability in terms of housing, those people in Davidson County may be moving out to those suburban counties. What is that being looked at? Can you tell me, or is anybody taking a look at that?
Yeah, and I want to make sure and be very clear when I say this. So there are progressive and democratic groups that are advocating for partisan seats, that are looking at exactly that, of where they think the growth is going, looking at the model that a Stacey Abrams had in Georgia, which is exactly what you just said, and that is people in a bright blue dot in a purple donut ring around it and a red sea outside were we're moving outside of those into those purple districts at great numbers. And that's what started to push and shift the Georgia legislature and Congress and now governor's house or the governor's race, not now, but the Senate races rather, push them in a different direction. And so there are absolutely partisan groups that are looking at that. Being completely open and transparent, my committee, the redistricting committee that I sit on, is not looking at partisan data. So when we are submitted maps, we do not see, and we will not weigh the partisan data as it sits within that bill. So I just want to make sure and clarify that before I make my next comment, because it is a slippery slope, and it could be an unintended consequence if the majority party, which is today the Republican Party, decides that they think they can win 2 seats and they split up. I mean, there are only so many voters in each individual district. If you begin to split up, or you take Republican voters away to give to somebody else to turn what is today a blue seat into a red seat, you actually take both of the districts, the one that you took from and the one that you gave to, you can theoretically put both of those in play. And so it is absolutely a chess match of where is growth going to be over the next 10 years? What are those voters going to look like? And how can you try to future-proof your seats? We've seen such growth in Rutherford County and Williamson County that we will likely see pickup seats. If you look at how purple Rutherford County is, there will be a strategic move as to whether or not they want to pack all of the Democrats into one seat or crack them and potentially put multiple seats at risk. And it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out. But there are multiple groups that are submitting maps based on partisan data to try and pick up seats for their represented political groups.
Okay, so go there. So we've had some questions come in about different groups that are submitting, their versions of the plans, and obviously you weren't on this committee, 11 years ago because you weren't in the House.
Right.
But how much does that go into play? So caucuses, do they submit plans? Does the House, the Democratic caucus submit a plan? The Republican caucus submit a plans? And let's just talk about, let's say that I submit a plan, like I spend a lot of time and I submit a plan. How are they looked at? I mean, are they paid attention to? I mean, I just submit a plan because I want to. Does somebody look at it, or does somebody say, I don't really care what he thinks? I mean, how much impact do those plans have?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, people have submitted, I've probably received 15 plus plans, and
Okay.
I look at every one of them and review it. And most of them are fairly similar because they're being drawn with a partisan bent in mind. So if you look at the voters and where they are and where they live today, they're all roughly the same. But once I receive it, I will submit it to the committee lawyer, who is Doug Himes, who I talked about at the very beginning of this presentation, and he will review it to make sure it meets the 5 requirements that we talked about. And we can go back to it, or you can look at it again, but it's got to use the same population numbers. It's got to be presented as for the state as a whole. Most of the plans that I've received are the county makeup that they want for their individual seat to look, and they don't want to fool with creating the rest of the state. They have to comply with the Voting Rights Act, Constitution of the United States, which again we've talked about is one person, one vote, reasonably compact and contiguous, and then how they're submitted. They've all been submitted the right way, and then the accompanying report, which I've only received a couple of those. So what I've been doing is, for example, Vice Mayor, you submit a map to me, I will help you complete it and get it to the final level of submission, and then either help you or point out the deficiencies that map may have. Once it meets all those requirements and is a legally, lawfully allowable map, it will be presented to the committee as a whole, and we will have the opportunity to vote on, the Schulman map or the House Democratic Caucus map or League of Women Voters map or whatever, whoever the groups are that are submitting. I mean, the Davis County Republican Party is going to submit a map. The state Republican Party is going to submit a map. The state Democratic Party is going to submit a map. So we will have multiple options to review, but the first threshold is making sure that it is lawfully allowable.
All right. So just for because this is intriguing to me. I mean, in the sense that, if you get 50 different maps, somebody's obviously looking at those maps, and you're all going to either vote them all down and pick one. Somebody's going to come in with the plan that is submitted to the House and the Senate.
Yes.
Are you, when you go through this, eventually does it come out as to whose plan actually was picked? So, let's say the Schulman plan comes through and nobody likes it, but so it gets voted down. But then there's another plan that comes in from somebody that is much more drawn to the majority party's interest. That's the plan that they pick. Or is there really kind of a plan that just comes down from, because it's a supermajority Republican legislature, does it just basically come down from them and then that's basically what is going to come out?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. I hope that that's not how it happens, because we haven't seen the final maps. We actually haven't seen. I've only seen the maps that have been presented to me. I've not seen the maps that other members have submitted. So I'm not sure, and we actually probably won't even do that until a little further along. I believe this committee will make a suggestion to vote in favor of or oppose whatever the final map is that gets submitted. I really do. I really hope, and right now, the speaker has not given any indication that this is not the way it's going to happen, because it is a bipartisan committee that he didn't have to do. He could have packed it with members of his own party and not listen to us at all. So there's clearly some reason for him to do that, whether it's that he wants to have the rubber stamp of it being a bipartisan and what he wants is going to happen, or he really wants to hear the different views. I hope it's the latter. But I believe we'll see these maps and could, maybe give ideas for what will influence the final map. And that final map will go into the House Bill 1035, 1037, 1034, and will be debated through that body. There will be amendments that get put on that bill that could theoretically strip out Davidson County and replace it with another map if we wanted to, or Shelby County and replace it with another map. But I don't believe there will be widespread changes and an amendment accepted, because it will undo all the work that will have been done up to that point.
Okay. So at least two more questions. We got about 4 minutes left. Makeup of the committee, Democrats, Republicans, the committee that you're serving on, what's the makeup?
There are Democrats, but it's not an even number. So
okay.
I don't know the exact. I think there are 4 Democrats and maybe 10 Republicans, something like that. We also, for the first time, have divided up into the 3 grand divisions with captains of each grand division. and they will oversee kind of the process of each grand division. And all three of those people are Republicans.
Okay, who's the captain of the Middle Tennessee area?
Kevin Vaughn from Memphis. So the idea, I think, was to take the incentive of somebody from Middle Tennessee constantly getting an earful of what they think the seat should look like. So they separated them. So Middle's from West, and then East and West are from Middle and East. So
okay, talk a little bit more about the congressional district, particularly Nashville. What are we likely to see? If you have any guess, I mean, this is probably a guess at this point, but obviously concerns in Davidson County about what could happen.
I mean, I am very hopeful that they don't crack the Tennessee Fifth. I mean, I think that it's extremely important for our future as a growing city and region to have a representation that is solely responsible for and answers to Davidson County. That being said, elections have consequences, and there are many voices that would like to see the potential pickup for one seat. And the question I get asked all the time is, there are 9. Democrats have 2. They want to take one more. What do they think they can get with 8 that they can't get with 7? And that's not really the calculus to be thinking of. It's on a national level. And if you need to pick up 4, 5, 6 congressional seats to shift the balance of power, where do you do that? I know for a fact that many high up Republicans don't want to see that split because of those unintended consequences, that they think they could get too cutesy and potentially have 2, 3 seats at risk over the next decade. And so I believe that will limit it. So I hope to see the 5th remain as 1, but who knows? I wish I had more information.
That's okay. We know it. We're going to see it play out in the next couple of months.
Yes.
2 things real quick. All the maps that come in, are they all viewable? Are they all public in the sense that at some point, once they are reviewed, will they all be able to be seen?
I don't know the answer to that. The sunshine laws were conveniently written to exclude the state house. So we have no obligation or requirement to share any of the maps. So I am unsure as to whether or not those will be shared publicly. I'm happy to share every map that is submitted to me and share it publicly, and will likely do that through my newsletter and ask for feedback on maps on what people would like to, how they would like to see this the state of Tennessee divvied up.
Okay, and then the last question again, participation. If the public wants to participate, the best way to get involved?
As always, call, email, text if you have your local representative, and come to committees. Come down and make sure that as people are voting, they are looking you in the eye, and it's as open a process as it can be. It makes it a lot easier if people are able to do it behind closed doors, and nobody knows it's happening. So.
All right. So people, next several months are going to be very, very important in this. Representative Freeman, thank you for taking the time and
thank you for
explaining
allowing
this.
me to speak on this important issue.
Sure thing. And I know people would like your slides. If you can share them, that would be great. Or you can give them to WPCTN and they'll get them out. I really do appreciate this. I know that there's a tremendous amount of interest in this, and I think you did an exceptional job of explaining kind of how the process works. And obviously, this is going to be challenging over the next several months, and And again, if people want to get engaged, this is the time right now. So again, thanks everybody for listening. Again, Representative Freeman, you do great. Thank you very much for being on here. Tabitha, thanks for introducing us both. And we're going to sign off. I know there'll be a new programs coming up in the future. Keep an eye out for those. Again, thanks to WPCTN for doing all this. Everybody, have a good rest of Friday and a good weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.